Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. Today, last night for us, really, was the Japanese Grand Prix. We did end up watching it at midnight our time when it happened. And all I really have to say was I feel like it was a little bit of a shit show.
I think it was probably the biggest shit show we've seen. Obviously since we started watching, but it was literally, it was the most stressful start. It was all over the place.
There were 5 cars that ended up retiring.
Yeah, Red Bull came back with a vengeance this weekend.
Max took Singapore personally.
He woke up swinging.
He chose violence this weekend.
Yeah, so lots and lots happened. I feel like, I don't know, I think because we were watching it in the States, we're in Central Time, and so we were trying to wake up either really early and watch it as fast as possible before we check our phones, or, just, taking naps in the middle of the evening and waking up for it. So, definitely our watch times were everywhere this weekend.
Yes.
But, it was crazy to watch. It was weird watching it in the middle of the night and not waking up to a cup of coffee.
Yeah, it felt really weird not eating my breakfast while watching the race, but...
Yeah, but, what a race is all I can say. Lots to get into, lots to discuss, and yeah, we'll get into it with you guys.
Yeah, let's just go into it. MC, where are we? We're at the Japanese Grand Prix, but tell us a little bit more about it.
Okay, location this weekend was Suzuka, Japan. This is about 3 hours away from Tokyo. I know a lot of the pre-race media seem to be taking place in Tokyo. They all, I'm assuming, took trains up. And really important track. The race official name was the Formula 1 Lenovo Japanese Grand Prix 2023. Shout out to Lenovo. You supply my ThinkPad. It is a brick of a computer, so indestructible.
Unlike the cars.
Yeah, unlike the cars this weekend. The first F1 Grand Prix was held in 1987, but this track was built in 1962. It was built because Soichiro Honda wanted a test track for the cars, so they went ahead and made what is known as Suzuka today. The circuit's been changed and modified several times in the track's history. I don't think it's really changed since F1's been on it, but they've done, lots of different updates to it. And when they were originally planning the track, there is one current crossover, but when they were planning it, apparently the designer wanted 3 crossovers.
Which would have been insane.
Yeah, so obviously that is not the Suzuka we know today, but that was, I can't even imagine.
No.
So the circuit length is 5.8 kilometers, or a little more than 3.6 miles. The number of laps was 53, and the race length this weekend was 307.4 kilometers, or 191 miles, give or take. The lap record here was 2019. It was set by Lewis Hamilton in Mercedes, and that lap time was 1:30.983. So there are 18 turns on this track, and there is only one DRS zone this weekend. So the DRS zone starts right after turn 15, and then activation goes ahead and starts right after turn 18, and that's start finish straight. Only one zone this weekend. Just because we spoke about it last week, the speed trap is right after turn 15, after the DRS detection zone, so getting that speed as they kind of, hopefully hit that fastest marker. And then just a few highlights of this track. It's used for multiple motorsport races. You'll see car races, motorcycle races, so it's pretty well used and well loved track throughout most of motorsports. And then just a specific highlight for this weekend. I'm sure lots of people saw it all over social media, but Turn 2 was nicknamed the Buzzin' Corner for this weekend. Sebastian Vettel, a very well-known and well-loved former F1 driver, fronted a project for biodiversity, so they went ahead and they made all of these little cute bee houses and,
No,
bee
he was
hotels.
calling them, bee hotels.
And just promoting the biodiversity, specifically with the insects that would come in, not just bees. But I think bees became, like, the mascot of it. So lots of very wholesome media came out of it, but it also highlighted something that is super important. Just a really special kind of highlight for the Grand Prix, specifically this year.
One of my favorite things was the day before, I think it was on Wednesday, Seb had gone live on his Instagram, and he was like, not all of the grid is going to be here, some people might show up, and then every single one of them ended up showing up. Every driver and even reserve drivers went to help out with it, and only Sebastian Vettel could do that. Like, that man is so well loved by every driver, every fan. Like, he is, like, what is it? That's Noah Khan's song, You're Gonna Go Far. The amount of edits that I saw of people being like, it's okay, like, if you left or whatever, like, we're still, like, you're gonna go far. Ugh, I was crying.
See, for me, I'm like, it's highlighting, like, wholesome content, and, like, it reminded me of field trips, like, elementary school field trips.
Well, the drivers probably never went on field trips because half of them, like, didn't do school. Yeah. So, I mean, they're, like, little children at heart.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was an exciting highlight to...
I love that wholesome content.
Yeah. It was nice, because it put aside, like, the racing and I think the intensity and focused on something that... is, like, the F1 platform can promote.
Yeah.
And everyone was talking about it. So it was really cool to see such an important movement and initiative. And so well talked about.
Knowing that the FIA and just F1 in general, they have a goal to be net zero by 2030. I think something like this is really important for them to highlight. I know it's only, like, one small act, but... if one small act adds up where everyone's doing these one small acts, I'm sure that's going to help in the end. So, I loved it. It was one of my favorite parts of the whole weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Let's get into the practices. There wasn't really a ton going on during practice, actually. It was pretty boring, and since it started at 9:30 for us, practice session 1 started at 9:30 at night on Thursday, and then the second practice was at 9:30 at night on Friday. Me being the grandma that I am, who goes to bed at like 8:30 every single night, I fell asleep after about 20 minutes of each practice session, and I told MC, like, wake me up if something exciting happens. And I think the only exciting thing that really happened was, well, it's not exciting. You obviously don't want people to crash. That's not exciting. But it's not as boring when something like that happens. Pierre ended up crashing in one of the practice sessions. I think it was FP2.
Yeah, FP2, right towards the end of the session, Pierre locked up and slid through the gravel, hitting one of the barriers. Last weekend we saw Lance Stroll have a really bad crash. This was obviously not as bad as severe, but, the tire at one point, was it him or Logan Sargent that the tire just snapped? One of them, because there's... Well... spoiler, there's another crash later on.
Yeah, Logan crashes later on in the weekends. Shocker. But, no, Pierre, he, slid out and, went into the grass, and then it looked like the front left of his car, slightly hit the wall, but then he dragged across it, and then I think that's what, his front left tire just, was hanging there.
Yeah.
Which is what it's supposed to do. There's part of the car that is supposed to just have the tire hang there rather than it go flying, just for safety purposes, obviously. But luckily, they were able to get the car all built together for qualifying, so he was able to get back out there. But the only other thing that really was going on during practice was there was some tire testing going on. MC, you want to talk about those tires?
Yeah, so Pirelli was, I mean, I'm sure they have representatives there every weekend, but it was a big weekend for them because they were they were testing a new version of the C2 tires for next season. So every race, the teams get 13 sets of tires unless otherwise stated. But this weekend, they got 2 sets of those testing tires. So we were sitting there, and they'd said this in the the media reports that came out before the practices. But we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, you're watching, and they have the S for the softs, the M's, the H's, and then all of a sudden they're throwing in T's, and me and Emma are like, what the hell are T tires? And then, as per usual, it takes us about a minute delay in our brains to catch up and
pick up our phones and just look it up.
It's the test tires. But so you saw a lot of them on these test tires?
I think probably because the weather was a lot hotter than predicted, and so I think a lot of them were hoping to test a bit more of their regular tires to figure out tire degradation for the weekend, but because of how hot it was, they didn't want to waste their regular tires for a practice session, and so they were using the test tires. I think also there probably was a requirement for each team how long they could use the test tires so that everyone did try them out, and it seemed like everything was going fine.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard any negative media towards these tires.
I don't even really know what the difference was between these C2 ones and the C2 that we currently are using.
It wasn't really explained what the difference was. It was just kind of it was just new test tires. So, additional 2 sets, which is pretty nice, especially with the fact that the course and the track were a lot hotter, so the tire degradation was worse this weekend.
Yeah.
And then just kind of while all of the practice sessions were happening, right before FP3, it was announced that Yuki Tsunoda and Danny Ricciardo will be the 2024 AlphaTauri drivers. So, mixed bag of emotions.
I think it is possible for people to be happy for Danny, but also sad for Liam Lawson. And that's currently where I'm at. I'm very happy that Daniel Ricciardo has a seat for next year, but I'm also very sad for Liam Lawson because he's been absolutely killing it, and he's a reserve driver again. And I'm hoping that next year, because silly season is going to be insane and so many people's contracts are up, I'm hoping he gets a seat. I think there's a current seat right now that personally I think he should have, but I don't think Red Bull's going to allow him to leave. I think their contracts are very tight and hard to get out of. So I do not think Liam Lawson will be leaving to go anywhere else. I think he will be staying as a reserve driver next year. So that's my personal opinion.
There's one seat remaining on the grid.
Yes.
It's the final Williams seat.
Logan Sargent's current seat.
I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like I haven't watched the sport and seen the way things have gone long enough to kind of see the way these moves will work. I said it that, I love the rookie drivers and I always have soft spots, but sometimes Logan Sargent is making it really hard to want him in that seat.
When you have someone like Liam who's been in 3-4 races now and has already gotten points and outperformed him, and Liam is in a worse car.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's tough. I think that it can go either way. I do have a sinking suspicion Logan will be in the car next year.
I did see an article, and there's some rumors floating around that Williams is possibly talking to Felipe Drogovic, who is currently the reserve driver for Aston Martin. I don't know if that's 100% true. Again, it's just a rumor, but I know that Felipe is pretty successful in the lower. I think he is an F2 champion. I don't think he has driven anything over the last year or two, because I think once you win F2, you can't go back to F2. And so I think right now he's just the reserve driver, but that's a possibility. There's a lot of current reserve drivers who could be possibilities for Logan's seat. But at the same time, Williams has invested a lot of time and money into Logan, and I think James Vowles, from what we could tell, wants to keep that investment and find out a way to make Logan better, but again, it's making it very difficult.
It's hard to back someone who keeps crashing. And I hate to say that because we saw it with people who, like, love Mick, you know. I hate to say it. But it's just really hard when there are other guys who, like Liam, are thrown into a car for the first time ever and they do well.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry, Liam has points. Logan doesn't. It's just hard to continue to sit there and understand why. But I also think, you know, who knows what conversations are happening. It's Williams. Yeah. Williams just needs to make a decision. I don't know.
Yeah, they need to announce it because all of the talk behind the scenes, or just even all of the drama that's going on for everybody else and everyone talking about Logan's seat, I think they need to just make the announcement on who's going to get the seat, because right now everyone is just speculating what's going to happen, and I'm sure that that's probably not great for Logan's mental health. I think it also probably makes it difficult to figure out how the rest of the season is going to go, because he has no idea what's going to happen next year.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm happy that AlphaTauri's announcement was made in Yuki's hometown race.
Yes.
You know, that was exciting, but I think at this point we're all just kind of we're itching for information and an announcement, and you know, maybe we'll get one this weekend with, you know, no Grand Prix happening. True. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know how long you can drag it out though, but anyways, the only other note on practice was that shocker, like we said at the beginning, Max came out with a vengeance this weekend, so he decided to be on top of every practice.
I don't think he decided. I think it just it's how it is.
Sometimes I think he just decides, you know.
I mean, it's not like in Singapore he decided, oh, this is going to be a bad weekend.
I mean, does anyone do that? But
anyways, that was practice and kind of what was going on during that time. And then we have qualifying, which was at like 2:30 in the morning for us. So we woke up and watched it the next morning and watched it a couple of hours later. But let's get into it in a quick second.
Yeah.
Like we said before about another crash that happened, Logan Sargent crashed in Q1, I think it was, which was a little frustrating, given that, did he crash last weekend too? He didn't finish the race last weekend, I don't think.
I can't. Maybe I would have to go back and check. But yeah, he crashed in the middle of Q1.
So he ended up starting P20.
Yeah, so he crashed Q1. It was a hard hit, right? Kind of at the start finish straight.
We watched the replay of it, and they slowed it down. I do feel like sometimes the F1 TV presenters and commentators, they do a really good job about explaining kind of what is going on in the car. And it looked like when he was coming around the turn, he was taking it a little too wide, and then he was going so fast, but he needed to slow down, but then he shifted up in gears, and at that point, it seems like he just lost control of the car because it didn't have really the grip that it needed.
Well, and that's something that we've heard a few weekends in a row, is that the car consistently has rear grip issues.
Yeah.
And so when he came out of, I think it was turn 18, hitting that straight, the car spun out. There are, it looks like turf or grass patches as well as gravel around Suzuka. So he spun out, and I think he just dragged through the gravel.
Yeah. You could see the Williams engineers in the garage just like, oh no, we're not sleeping tonight.
Well, and I think it's the realization that, like, as a spectator, you don't see what happens between, you know, when you're watching this on TV, you don't see what's happening in that pit lane between, Q3 and the start of the race. And these guys, if there is a crash, they're reconstructing the car, That was the worst part about, obviously the safety of the driver is the biggest concern when there is a crash, but then you see the damage to the car and your heart just breaks for what these engineers and the mechanics and the pit teams have to do overnight.
I'm pretty sure I didn't go in depth on reading some of these articles, but I'm pretty sure they ended up using like a third car, which is a penalty. And so they didn't have the time to rebuild all of the damage that had been done, and so you basically just have like pieces from a third car ready to go, and so I think they ended up getting like a penalty or something for that, but yeah, that's how Q1 started, and so then a yellow flag went up and everyone had to wait, but
yeah the only other mention that I wanted to make about Q1 was that this weekend there was a maximum lap time enforced by the FIA, by the race marshals, and essentially at one point there were a few drivers that were possibly going to get their lap times deleted, and one that this did end up affecting was Zhao, and so we saw both Alfa Romeos
out in
Q1. So Q1 knocked out Bottas, Zhao, Lance Stroll, Hülkenberg, and Sargent after that crash. So besides that, I will say, Q1, it just seems like a lot of people were saving tires, so there were moments where there was not a lot of people on the track throughout all of qualifying.
And practice. Yeah. There were times, too, where people just waited to go out until maybe halfway through the session.
Yeah, I think it was a hard weekend on the tires, and you could see that with how people were kind of hanging back in the pits.
One thing that I did notice during qualifying that we commented on last week during the Singapore Grand Prix was how people will go in for qualifying and they'll do one quick lap and then they'll go and sit in the pit for a bit and then come back out towards the end. There was one or two cars where they ended up just staying out there and getting their fast lap done, like their last fast lap done, while everybody else was in their garages, which in my opinion, I think that makes way more sense because you don't have the traffic of other cars. And I know when you are doing it, when you wait and you do your last lap at the end, you're hoping you're going to get the grip from other cars going ahead of you. But if you're doing it in the middle of the qualifying session, there's already grip laid, like there's already rubber laid down on the track because everybody's already gone out for one fast lap. So the people who ended up staying out and doing that quick lap in the middle, I think it made sense for them. I think Alice Albon was one of them.
Well, and then you saw, you saw all of this pit lane traffic.
Yep.
And you saw all these guys, and, in Q1 you saw Zhao got affected by the fact that there was traffic. That's what lowered his lap time. That's what ended up causing that lap time to get deleted, was because he was going around people. Obviously, there's yielding happening, but when there's traffic, you're not going to get that fastest lap that you need. You're dodging things.
You're not going to be able to go on the perfect line.
Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it was interesting because I think we saw certain people successful. But I don't know. I think them coming into the pit lane to switch tires and everyone gets that last fastest lap. I love it and I hate it. I think sometimes it's just like you're waiting out the clock.
Yeah,
once the clock dribbling hits zero, the ball.
Once the clock hits 0, it feels like we're just on the edge of our seats waiting to see who gets into the next qualifying session.
Which makes it exciting,
but at the same time, there's so many cars on the track at once, you're not going to be able to get the right line, and I think the people who went out in the middle, it made sense for them. So, I mean, that's what happened in Q2. The McLarens actually didn't go out for the second half of Q2 because they felt that their times were fast enough, and so they wanted to save that extra set of tires, and so both Lando and Oscar stayed in their garages for the last 5-6 minutes while everybody else was out doing their last lap. And it was nerve-wracking watching their times go down in the board, and them ended up P9 and P7 in Q2, but that still meant that they moved on.
They moved on, but we were sitting there and they were in their pits. There was no way that they could redeem this at this moment.
Yeah, the clock had already run out.
And maybe that's great confidence in oneself, but it was a risky move. Granted, it didn't affect them negatively, but it could have.
Yeah, there was a chance that it could have.
Yeah, so Q2 saw Liam Lawson, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Esteban Ocon, and K-Mag, Kevin Magnussen, all knocked out. And then Q3 was, I don't want to say quiet. It was a clean qualifying.
There was nothing crazy going on.
Yeah.
The starting order for at least the top three ended up being P1 Max, P2 Oscar, and P3 Lando. So Oscar is actually the first rookie to start on the front row of the grid since, I think it was Nico Hülkenberg in whenever his rookie year was. I don't know. It's been it's been a long time.
I think it was
a decade.
It was 13 or 14. It was, It was enough that it was a significant amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, this weekend, Oscar has the same upgrades that Lando had last weekend. So this weekend, they had the same kind of car. And Oscar, I think, beat Lando by 0.0 something.
It was 0.04 of a second. So it was very, very tight. But it was nice to see, one, the upgrades on both cars for the McLarens.
Yeah.
But also to see, Oscar outshine Lando in this moment. I do think we've had moments where I felt like Oscar can outshine Lando, and then something happens to the car. Or, he hits ground. It feels like something has constantly happened to Oscar when he's been in these really close moments. But I feel like he's racing. I feel like McLaren raced smart during qualifying.
This was
besides that,
one of their smartest weekends, I think.
Yeah, and I think just you saw the power of the upgrades that they're making to the cars and what it's doing.
I still don't understand how their upgrades have been so successful. I also don't understand how they're making so many more upgrades. It feels like than other teams. With the cost cap, I don't get how they're making so many upgrades. I'm not going to question it, though, at the same time, because I'm a McLaren fan, as you can tell. So I am okay with them being successful.
Yeah, but Max was on top every qualifying. We were starting to see the beginning of some Checo-related struggles. He wasn't as close to Max. Something that we've kind of seen throughout, Checo.
Since the middle of the first half of the season, I feel like.
Yeah, Checo's just kind of, it seems like he struggled to catch up, and while he did place well in Q2, I think we saw a bit of a shit show at the race, a little bit at what felt like out of his hands, so I think we saw a little bit of that Red Bull, falling behind, that panic that I feel like they can kind of set themselves in.
Yeah.
I feel like we saw that, kind of leading into the race. But with that said,
let's talk about the race.
Let's get into it.
Like we said at the beginning, the race start was a bit of a shit show. The way that the camera was focused for the race, we only really saw the front bit of Max, Oscar, and Lando, I feel like, because right off the start, Lando actually had, I think, the best reaction time out of everyone, and so he went ahead of Oscar and almost got in front of Max, but Max actually almost pushed Oscar off the side of the track. It looked like from our perspective. But Lando ended up getting ahead of Oscar, so then it was Max, Lando, and Oscar. But as you're seeing this go on, there was a whole lot going on behind them. So in the middle of the pack, what was it? Carlos actually cut off Checo, but then Checo pushed Lewis into the grass a bit. Not a bit, like the whole ton. And that actually damaged Checo's front wing. So this was kind of the beginning of Checo getting involved in a lot of stuff today. But then even further back, what was going on, everyone off the start, I feel like they all are like pedal to the metal. Let me try to get to the center of the line. But if you have 20 cars trying to all go into the same line, everyone's coming together and it's just not going to end well. And so Joe actually touched wheels with Alex Albon, and I don't know how the car stayed in a straight line, but Alex Albon like lifted off the ground.
He caught some air.
Yeah, it was a flying Williams car last night, and
at some point in the last 24 hours.
And then so Alex had some damage because of that, so it was a rough start for him already. And then Kevin Magnussen was right behind all of this going on, so you can actually see from his driver cam, there's a really good shot of the entire situation.
Yeah, it was funny. It felt like because so much had happened within the first 30 seconds of the race, they kept showing you like increasing views from different cars because so many people like got affected so quickly that they just were like, here's it from Kevin Magnussen, here's it from Zhao, like just showing you as many angles because it was so hard to understand what happened because it all happened in such a small amount of time.
Yeah. Well, and then I am pretty sure I couldn't see anything when I was looking after the race to see exactly what cars had an issue. I didn't see anyone talk about this, but didn't an Alpine go onto the grass or something? Like, one of the Alpines looked like they went off at some point in this start. But it might have been similar to Lewis, where, like, they went off for 2 seconds and came back on because they just got pushed.
So many things happened, Emma.
Yeah. But because of all of this stuff that went on, there was carbon fiber everywhere, and so safety car went out from lap 2 to lap 5. I think this was the messiest start that we've seen in a while. I don't know if the first half of the season there was more messier starts, but since the Canadian Grand Prix, since we've been watching, this is the worst start that we've had. But from there, it was just kind of like, let's stay all together during the safety car, and that also gave some people the chance to go in and, like, I think Checo went in and got a new front wing. I think Alex Albon went in and also got a new front wing since his was all over the track. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how the start went off. And then from there, Bottas was spun out by Logan Sargent. So Logan hit Bottas somewhere after the safety car, I believe it was, and that ended up causing Valtteri to DNF. He was the first car to DNF. Unfortunately, I feel like the Alfa Romeos have just been taking all the hits.
Yeah, he...
literally and figuratively.
I think he ultimately made the decision. Like,
yeah.
I think the car was just affected. It just seemed like there was so much damage happening to certain cars that it became undrivable.
Yeah.
And, why are you going to sit there and damage the car further? Just pull it in. Why are you going to continue to just, there's no reason why he should continue racing. So.
Yeah. Well, and something else that happened during the safety car, during all of this, when Checo had gone in to get a new front wing, he then went back out and actually cut in front of Lance Stroll. So during the safety car, they have to stay in the same order. And I'm not sure how it works when it comes to, like, you going into the pit lane, if you have to get up to where you were before, but he cut in front of Lance Stroll, so the order of cars was all messed up. And he actually ended up getting a 5-second penalty because of that. The FIA was really quick about giving penalties this weekend, and even some might say a little too quick, because there were things that were going on that maybe should have been 10-second penalties rather than 5-second penalties. I think because of all the heat they've been getting from last weekend, where they should have given Max and Checo both penalties.
There was a lot of discussion about the lack of decisions with the way Max impeded last weekend. You know, the way we were talking about it was the refs are there to make the calls when the race is happening.
Yeah.
It was something that a lot of the pundits were talking about as well, that, you know, you have to make the decisions. You can't sit there and think about it and sit on it. This is happening. You don't see calls, major calls like this that can affect the race. In other sports, you know,
It's not
the
like
massive delays aren't happening.
It's not like a FIFA ref in a soccer game is like, let me check afterwards, just keep playing, guys. Like, no, that's not how it works. You gotta make the call now.
And so I think that the speed at which that they were reviewing things and making the calls, I don't know, it seemed like they were trying to prove a point, and I don't know if it was a petty move on the FIA's part, but it just, people started to get concerned about the speed at which they were making these calls.
Yeah.
I think Checo deserved the 5-second penalty. I think that he had done a lot on the field. And
well, going into that, actually, on lap 13, while trying to pass Kevin Magnussen, Checo basically did the same move he did to Alex Albon last weekend in Singapore, and tried to cut on the inside line of a turn, but didn't have the actual right-of-way to cut on the inside, and just decided to play bumper cars and completely hit K-Mag, and K-Mag's car actually ended up flipping around, like turned around.
Not flipping, it spun.
Spun around. Sorry. Spun around, and then K-Mag had to obviously go back and get into the right place. But Checo, after that, had a bunch... His radio was like, oh, I think I have front wing damage. Yeah, because you decided to play bumper cars in a really delicate car. Like, this is not a bumper car at a fair.
It just seemed, seeing they replayed Checo trying to cut into that corner so many times. It was almost the exact same way.
It was the exact same thing.
And one thing that they said last weekend was, when you're making those turns, you know, yeah, you have your side view mirrors, but you're feeling confident enough that you have the inner...
Yeah.
You have the inner corner, and then, you know,
if you're the car,
Checo just comes in, and you're not watching your rear tire, you know?
Well, and if you're the car behind the other one, and the other one's taking that inside line, and they, like, there's no way you can pass them on the inside, I feel like it's your responsibility as the slower car, or at least the car behind, to not crash into the other, and maybe find another way to pass that person. Like, I don't know, I got really frustrated by that, but because of that, Checo actually ended up being retired, so he was out at lap 15.
Which is something that online a lot of people were, a lot of people were making fun of the fact that, I mean, we just spoke to you guys for 8 minutes about the first 15 laps of a 53-lap race?
Yeah.
Like, all of this
That's, like,
crap.
half of my notes are about the start, basically.
Like, the first 15 laps, it just was like, it was like dominoes.
Yeah.
You know? And Checo was the common enemy on the track this weekend.
Well, and the next person who ended up retiring was Logan Sargent. I think he had enough damage from when he and Bottas hit each other, so he ended up retiring. Not much else to really be said there, honestly.
Yeah, I think it was a weekend that, again, to quickly just talk about it and wrap it up, I think it was a weekend that he needed to show a strong performance.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I think it's anyone's game, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's still on the grid next year, but I think he needed something and he didn't bring it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, nothing really happens at this point for a little bit. I feel like there was just a lot of laps of people kind of staying in their places and trying to manage their tires.
Max is in the lead.
Obviously. We don't even need to say that. That's just not even a question. But one of the things that was going on around lap 28, Lando and Oscar were fighting. I hate when teammates are fighting each other on the track. I feel like it's not responsible as a teammate. I think you are talking to your race engineer and you should figure out who should pass the other, just depending on who has more pace, and the team can figure that out by data. And if you think that you're just going to fight each other on the track, not a good move. We've seen how it's ended poorly in the past, and we don't need that again. So Lando was talking to his race engineer and asking if he could pass Oscar. I think Oscar has a really great one-lap pace, and he's able to qualify probably higher than Lando, or he should probably try to qualify higher than Lando more often than not. But then when it comes to actual race pace, I think Lando has a bit more experience with it and is more comfortable with the car. And so I think he's able to hold a better pace than Oscar throughout more laps.
Well, before we get into them fighting, I just want to quickly highlight he finally successfully had good safety car interaction.
Yeah, Oscar's been so unlucky when it came to safety cars, and this was the first race ever where McLaren called it at the perfect time for him to come in.
Yeah, I can't remember around which lap it was.
It was the virtual safety car that went out when K-Mag was spun off by Toyota.
So right before it was called, Oscar just pitted, and he pulls into the pit lane, and then they call for the safety car. Yeah. And it was just the perfect timing for him to have that, because, you know, he's going to get out front, as far front as you can, you know, with Max obviously in the front. But it put him in a perfect position.
Yeah.
And that it was just this perfect execution that I think we had seen in so many other races where Oscar gets kind of just his
it's really
positioning on the board gets screwed over because of the timing with the safety car. It's always been off with Oscar's calls.
And it's not even McLaren's fault half the time.
No,
it's usually
it's
just the luck of when the safety car happens.
But this weekend we saw it, and I think like everyone just felt this ecstatic, like, oh my god, this kid is finally, like, it's finally happened. So we saw that. So he did have, you know, him and Lando were close for the majority of, like, this front half. But I will say you could see that Lando just had the pace.
Well, and so that was the thing. Lando was talking to his race engineer, asking if he could move ahead, and it took, like, a lap or two for Oscar to finally let Lando through, and you could hear Lando saying to his race engineer, like, what is he doing? And so we got nervous, being like, oh no, something's gonna happen, but Oscar ended up letting him through, and Lando pulled away pretty quickly, I'd say.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more like the media making it more selective, dramatic, whatever it is. I just think they were trying to make a decision, and I didn't listen to the entirety of both radios when this moment was happening, but it just seemed like they were making a decision on the back end and they weren't communicating to the drivers, so it got a little awkward.
Yeah.
I also think, like, so Max was, I don't know, at this point, like 15 seconds ahead. You have Lando and Oscar who are trying to figure out who's going to be the leading McLaren. And then we had Charles Leclerc right behind.
Yeah.
And at one point, because you had this uncomfortable moment between the two McLarens, you could kind of see Ferrari with Charles. You could see him gaining. And my biggest concern when Lando finally got the okay to pass, that Oscar was going to kind of get stuck now battling Charles.
But Charles ended up having to go and pit eventually for new tires, and that's when Oscar was able to stay out and move.
Yeah, and then, you know, I was watching Oscar's gaps between all of the other drivers like a hawk, because I was just, like, nauseous nervous for this poor kid. But, you know, he ends up being safe. So.
Yeah. So around the same time, I don't have the exact lap that Lance Stroll ended up retiring, but he retired at one point, so he did not finish. And then Alex Albon retired at lap 29. So both Williams retired, so not a very good weekend for them. I thought it was going to be a decent weekend for them because of how similar the track is to Silverstone, and they did a great job at Silverstone, but turned out to be probably their worst weekend. Unfortunately, fingers crossed, they'll be fine for the next race, which I think is in Qatar.
Yeah.
And then while this is actually going on, in the background, we're seeing clips of Checo get back into his car in the garage, and he is being sent back out at lap 39 to serve his 5-second penalty. So he went out for a lap, came into the pit, served 5 seconds, and then I think maybe went back out for one lap.
It was so annoying. I'm sorry.
It was petty.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just didn't care.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe it's because it was just so ridiculous, but I just didn't care. Like, okay, he wants to do it, whatever. Like, if he affects other drivers on the grid, then, I don't know. I thought it was just so, it took away from what was happening on the grid, and it was such bullshit. It was so...
I don't know how it's allowed for him to have done that. I hope that the FIA probably this week will say that that's not allowed anymore.
Also, like, what was the point, Red Bull?
It's supposed to add it onto his time, but it was a waste of time. It was a waste of the media watching that go on, and I was nervous that when he went back out that he was going to cause a problem with another car.
He did enough damage on the grid that it was a worry. It was a legitimate worry.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure his car, like, was messed up enough after hitting how many people, and then you're going to go send it. I thought it was... You know, obviously they probably took all of safety into effect, so, like, I'm not sitting here being like, Red Bull could have, you know, hurt someone, but it just seemed so unnecessary, and, you know, the media coverage kept cutting back to him because he's just sitting there in his freaking car, and they're like, if he goes out now, he's 20 laps behind. And it's like, I don't care about this. Like, I care about the guys who are actually
racing
on the grid. Like, if this is a Red Bull stunt, then just... I don't know. I thought it was just a little too much attention.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It took away from me a little bit. Sorry.
Anyways.
After that rant.
George and Oscar at this point were then fighting for third, but it wasn't really a fight. Oscar just needed to get past George, and then he was fine. George did not have the pace to keep up for third. I think over the next 10 laps at this point, that's kind of the rest of the race. It was then George, at lap 49, George is told to give Lewis the position because then George and Lewis were fighting, and it was giving Mercedes flashbacks.
It was so...
Again.
It was so uncomfortable. It felt like there was... a lot carried from last weekend into this weekend.
Yeah.
And obviously, again, this is coming from a third party who literally has no association with any of these people in real life. But it just felt like George had this chip on his shoulder through all of his radio comments. And listen, I think it's good that he came back into it and he wasn't sitting there and, you know... there weren't, like, flashbacks to the moment, you know, as far as we could tell, but it just felt like he expected to be the number one Mercedes that weekend, but Lewis was.
Well, and I think a harsh truth that's hitting George right now is, at least the past 2 weekends, Lewis has had more pace. And this happened again, like this weekend, and Lewis just needed to get past George because it was putting Lewis at risk. And the team is going to know who's going faster and who's going to be able to, like, who has better tires, who's going to be able to keep this pace longer, and that was Lewis. And George was not going to let him through for a second, but then ended up letting him through. Then Lewis his race engineer told Lewis to do basically the same move that Carlos did last weekend with Lando by slowing down so that George could get DRS so that Carlos couldn't pass George. But George, again, had older tires and could not keep up. And so you just see George with the DRS open and Carlos just
zooms past him with his DRS open.
Then George is really upset about it. And I feel like sometimes when stuff like this happens, George almost gives up in a way. We don't really hear a lot of the radios after stuff like this happens, so I don't know what George said. I don't know if he just, like, actually lost pace and could not keep up anymore. But, yeah, so Carlos passed George at lap 50, and at this point there are 13 seconds left, and I feel like everyone pretty much stayed where they were for the last 3 laps.
13 seconds left?
And 3 laps left.
Oh, I thought
because it was 53 laps.
I heard you say 13 seconds left. I was like,
that's the fastest laps ever.
I was like... that's what I was like, what?
No. At the end of the day, Max ended up finishing 19.4 seconds ahead of the field, which is insane. I think that's the biggest gap Max has had for a little while now. And then Lando came in second, and Oscar came in third, and Oscar actually got driver of the day as well. So this was Oscar's maiden podium, and it was super exciting to see. I wish that they had focused a bit more on the podium on Oscar and Lando and their interaction, because Lando was definitely celebrating with Oscar, but Red Bull actually did win the Constructors Championship this weekend, and so they were focusing a lot on Max and Christian Horner, which is cool and all, but this was someone's very first podium. Red Bull's won Constructors Championships before. I want to see someone celebrate their first podium.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably just the camera angles that we were getting.
Yeah, hopefully, like, maybe Sky Sports got more angles of Lando and Oscar.
Yeah, but it was, I don't know, I got a little
You got, I saw a little, I had some tears in your eyes.
It was like, I don't know, it was cool. We talked about it weeks ago, when we first started, like, episode 1, 2.
Yeah.
And we talked about how excited we were to watch the McLarens, and yeah, it's only been a few episodes, but it's exciting to see it come to fruition. So.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think if we have any more thoughts, we can talk about it in our final thoughts of the episode.
That's what it's there for.
Yeah, so we're going to wrap it up at that point. All right. Final thoughts of the weekend. Do you have any?
I think, so having done the few drivers that we've done for our driver of the day, you see these more historical races and you see all these DNFs. And I think to see 5 cars DNF this weekend...
It was a lot.
It was a lot. Like, we've seen in the last few races, we've seen some hard crashes, but to see these many cars not finish the race...
Yeah.
I think for me, that was the biggest takeaway, that there are so many safety measures now compared to, however many years you want to go back, but cars still fall apart.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, one, really eye-opening to still see that a lot of people can still pull out. I think the most we've seen prior is, 2?
Maybe 3.
Maybe 3, but to see 5 cars. So I think that was interesting to finally see a race like this happen, especially knowing Suzuka is notoriously, like, most of their favorite.
Well, and it's the historical track that Senna and Prost had all their issues on. Yeah,
so I thought that was just a really different perspective to a race weekend.
Yeah.
To see that. And I'm curious if we'll have another race in the 2023 season that, has as much happen in such a short amount of time as we did here. And then I think it was just, like, we said a few minutes ago, I think it was just really, really good to see McLaren do what they did this weekend, to see Oscar finally get what I feel he deserves.
Yeah, it's been coming.
Someone who, in everything we've seen, there's been such dedication to, like, the craft of driving, to figuring out the car, to working with McLaren, and to also know that he has that extension of his contract. It just seems like the good times.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't that announced at the beginning of the weekend, too?
I can't remember if it was last weekend or...
I think it was at the beginning of this weekend.
It was the beginning. It
yeah,
was
it was
the
right
beginning
before
of
the
this
press
weekend.
We forgot to mention that.
Oh my god.
Oscar Piastri's contract with McLaren was extended for 2 more years, so he will be there through the end of, 2026?
2026, yeah.
Yeah, so that's super exciting, especially him and Lando. They will be teammates at least for 2024 and 2025. Lando's contract is over at the end of 2025. I'm sure McLaren will try to keep him. I think it would really depend on him on where he goes.
Him, the car, just what the grid looks like at that point in time. But I don't know, I thought it was just a really happy weekend for McLaren. There was that little bit of awkwardness that we saw during the race, but I don't know, I don't want to focus on that. I think that there was so much to celebrate, not only for Red Bull, who won Constructors, but to see another team just have such a special moment as well. I think, maybe the Constructors Championship took away from it a little bit, but it was still a really, I think, positive ending of a weekend for a team that we've kind of grown to really love.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's my takeaways.
For me, what do I think of this weekend? I think it was definitely an interesting one. The battles between teammates were frightening, and I've really grown to hate them. I need to dig a bit more into understanding the actual stuff that went down during the 2016 season between Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, but that's what everyone calls Brosades, and their fights with each other on the track. And because of that, I think it's given people PTSD when it comes to teammates fighting on the track. I think this weekend, Oscar, in his post-race interview, he did say, Lando had more pace, and that's just something that I have to work on. And so I think he understood. I don't think that there's any beef between the two of them. I think they're probably totally chill. I think if there's anything, there might be beef between Lewis and George. This weekend, Toto wasn't actually in Japan for the race.
No.
I don't know where he was. Maybe Harvard, teaching at Harvard, since he's a professor there. And Nick DeVries just started taking classes there, so maybe he's hanging out with Nick DeVries. But yeah, I think this weekend was good. I'm excited for McLaren. I think that they've had a really hard couple of years for such a historically successful team. And so to see them with 2 young drivers, and like Lando said in one of the pre-race interviews, he thinks that they have the strongest driver pairing on the grid. I'm excited to see what they can do over the next 2 years as teammates. I hope that they can get to the level where they can work together like Carlos and Lando did last weekend, and I think that they will. So I'm excited for that. I do want to say congratulations to Red Bull for winning the Constructors Championship. There are some theories floating around that Red Bull threw last weekend so that they could win the Constructors this weekend in Japan, the home of Honda, who supplies their power units. Obviously, nobody knows if that's true, but if it is true, that's interesting. But no, they also, one thing I found a little wild, they already had their shirts, world champions, world constructor champions, shirts and flags ready to go.
How long do you think they've been carrying those around? That's my question.
I think Helmut Marko sleeps in that shirt every night and is like, I love Max Verstappen.
I just thought it was
I hate that man.
I don't know, I feel like I've always heard that for something like the Super Bowl, they, print out both teams.
I don't think they did. I think they just printed out Red Bull.
How long has Red Bull,
I don't think,
been carrying
I think Red Bull made that themselves.
No, I think so, too. That's what I'm saying. How many countries have they been, maybe it'll be this weekend.
Maybe they actually did plan it for this week. Because, actually, the Japanese Grand Prix is typically where the world champion... It's not typically, but often it's where the world champion is crowned and the constructors champion is crowned. So, because it's so far in the season, and at that point, with the amount of points that have been racked up, sometimes it's hard for people. It's impossible for anybody to catch up. And that's exactly what happened this weekend.
Yeah.
There's no way that anyone's going to be able to catch up points-wise to Red Bull. So that's how they won the Constructors Championship. I do think that they have, if McLaren stays on this route, I think that they've got a real fight next year.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be an easy battle. But if McLaren starts their season next year like how they started it this year, then Red Bull's going to be perfectly fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it'll all be interesting, and I definitely think huge congrats to Red Bull and all that they've done and all that the team has done to create an incredible race car at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
So, that's all I have.
That's all that I have.
So, no Grand Prix next weekend.
Yeah, so this is going to be our only episode that we post this week, and then next Monday we're going to post a get ready for the Qatar Grand Prix. We figured because there's no race to review next weekend, we might as well just only post one episode this week and one episode next week.
Give you guys a break from our voices.
Yes, also give us a second to breathe.
Yes.
But yeah, that's when the content will be coming out. As always, make sure to check out all of our social media. We're trying to be a bit more active on TikTok because we haven't been in the past. And as always, we're very active on our Instagram, so make sure to check all of that stuff out. And make sure to like and subscribe, do all of the things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all, really, for today.
All right, we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, bye, guys.